Recently, when my friends is trying to find a new place to rent, and they just blatantly say that I just need a Chinese, I don't need a Malay, you see. Yeah, so I think these are the things that you may not exactly see, but when it happens, you're just like, oh my God, is it for real? Like in Singapore, where racial harmony is very much promoted. Yeah.
Chances are, you've probably heard a conversation like that one before. There are dozens of these incidents floating around online, of complaints against allegedly racist agents or landlords.
And based on the 2019 YouGov survey, this seems to be a concerning trend in the local rental market. But what the statistics can't tell you is why this is happening so frequently. I'm Eileen, and in this video, I want to explore the challenges that people face when finding rented homes, especially minorities. And if the search does seem extra difficult for them, does it always come down to race?
According to the YouGov research, about 23% of Singaporeans have faced discrimination when trying to rent. 2 years on after that survey, I wanted to know if rental market conditions have changed, so I set up an experiment with a couple of friends.
Basically house hunting for our own places to rent, so like individual rooms in both HDBs and condos. The aim of this experiment is to see if there's any difference in the perception we're going to get from real estate agents when we apply to the exact same listings. Do you guys have any expectations of how this will go?
This topic is quite hot right now, right? So, I mean, I've been looking on social media and people have been posting a bit about how there's discrimination towards the non-Chinese. I have low expectations for myself and for you.
I think for me, the expectations are not very high as well. But I would say there are people that probably will be more open, but then there will also be another side of people who are not so open. So we'll have to see.
We're running the test for about a week, and I'll check in later with Asad and Cash about the responses we got. However, statistics often obscure more personal stories, which is where Anne and Vishal come in. They've been married for 7 years and have 2 young kids. After selling their house earlier this year, they started looking into rental options.
What was the whole application and reaching out process like?
Actually, I'm the one that actively looking because I'm more picky in that sense. There was one unit that we like it so much because it was newly renovated, and I have a chance to actually meet the landlord and agent face to face, so we can discuss things faster and can close the
And so what was the conversation like from there?
Okay, the first thing is he asked me about my background. So I told him that we are a family of 4 and our professions, and we are locals, right? And according to the landlord's agent saying that usually our family profile usually are the most preferred among the landlords. It happened that he find that we are his first choice. Before I left, he kind of expressed his interest to rent out his unit for my family.
I understand that you guys were almost going to sign the contracts already. So can you tell me what happened during that process?
Yeah, before signing the contract, they request for our documents like copy of our NRIC. So when I submitted both our NRIC, so I got a reply saying that the landlord doesn't want to rent out to us. And there's no reason indicated. So when I call the agent up, the landlord's agent, he said that we were kind of rejected because my husband is an Indian.
And Vishal, when you heard this, what sort of thoughts were running through your head?
I mean, I was somewhat dismayed because I've grown up in Singapore. I was born here. I've lived overseas for a few years, and I have never encountered such discrimination before.
Did they provide any explanation about why they didn't want Indian tenants?
They did not really go into the specifics of why they felt this way, but my understanding is that they may have some concerns about Indians cooking and using
the
lifestyle and factors like that, which may affect the cleanliness of the unit.
And Vishal, how do you feel about landlords making these kinds of assumptions, whether it's about cleanliness or maintaining the home or things like that?
I feel it's personal prejudices and it's not really based on any logical analysis. Instead of making all these assumptions, what they should do is actually consider what exactly their concerns are and address those concerns regardless of race or religion.
After that, did you guys change anything about how you conducted the search?
Before I actually go and visit the house, I will mention clearly that my husband and I we are interracial. My husband is Indian. So will the landlord have any issue with that? After being upfront with our background, I don't think we ever encountered any landlords that have preferences on the race.
Or even if they have preferences, they may not be forthright and they may not actually state it upfront. They would rather go around and say that we may prefer another family, for the unknown reasons.
Anne and Vishal's story is just one of many where the conversation on racial preferences in the rental market gets shut down. But what is the thinking behind landlords having these preferences, and where does it overlap with Singaporeans' opinions? So to try and answer that, I'll be asking folks on the streets what they think are valid reasons for landlords to have racial preferences.
Indian or Chinese, those eat different things. Those people, Indian cooking, they don't like. All those things, they cannot go together and stay. I guess maybe some people like familiarity. So maybe, let's say if I'm Malay, maybe if I were to choose maybe fellow Malay, maybe because of language barrier, religion. I mean, these could be factors, but individually, everybody has their own reasons.
I don't think there's any particular reason why there should be any racial preference. Some of them would just prefer to be the same race, I guess, because of the stereotypes that they have of other race, such as say the smell, or they believe that the other race have lesser hygiene practices, but it's not true. So yeah, it's just based on their choice. So I don't think at any point it's acceptable. Yeah.
Racial preference, right? Yeah, I think it's okay because ultimately it's their own house that they are renting, right? So maybe for example, for Indians, they might pray consistently, then the smell might be very overbearing, then maybe the smell will stay permanently at their house, then they might not be very okay with it. So I think it's perfectly fine though.
A commonly cited cause for racial preferences seems to be cultural practices, with the underlying generalization that members belonging to the same racial communities will behave in a similar fashion. I want to know just how commonly one encounters these preferences, and what role does the property agent play in addressing the situation? I decided to talk to a real estate agent who has a more macro view of the industry. Winston Chan is a sales director with Orange Tea and Thai. He's been working in the property market since 2008.
If you had to give a broad estimate, out of every 10 landlords you deal with, how many have this sort of bias?
I would say out of 10, usually 4 to 5 would have some form of preference for certain kind of profiles. Some of them would be very interested in what they're doing. They wouldn't want blue-collar kind of tenants.
Does that 4 to 5 figure kind of apply for landlords' racial preference as well?
Yes, yes.
Okay, and what do you think is behind this racial preference?
I guess it's maybe due to some of their past bad experiences. They tend to think that this sort of racial profile would actually repeat the kind of bad experiences that they had.
So what are some other clauses besides the security deposit that they can put into the tenancy agreement to protect their property?
There is one clause that says that the tenant has to allow any contractor or workman to actually enter the premises to, for example, do some checks or do some repair work. If let's say we suspect that this tenant is not actually taking care of the place, the agent can actually go in to actually see at the same time the condition of the place and report it back to the landlord.
I think more prominent will be the Indian Chinese race, where they cook curries and the whole house is you smell like curries. That I think some Chinese landlord is can't really take it. I'm also a landlord actually, rather than a tenant, but I'm not so particular so long they keep to their rules and regulation that is specified and then they return it clean. But my friend, yes, because she's quite against certain races, because I told the curry issue, because they feel that in those Indians, they tend to cook a lot of oily stuff and the whole kitchen is spoiled. So in a sense, she's discriminating against the race. But to me, I feel it's not so much a race, it's your food preference.
When property agents encounter this kind of racial bias from landlords, what is the recommended industry practice on how to handle or react to it?
You have to come across as being someone who's neutral, so you cannot actually take sides, or you cannot show a bias or open discrimination towards anyone.
Would they be attempting to convince the landlord to be open to other races, or how would that whole conversation go?
I think end of the day, it depends on your relationship with the landlord. If you're on good terms with the landlord and the landlord trusts you, then they'll be more open to your opinions.
The landlord's preferences become too much of a fuss. Like they are very determined to have a certain race or a certain profile of renter, and like when does an agent decide to just like give up?
I guess it's case to case because it's about your gut feel. Speaking from my experience as a self-employed property agent, I think any agent should be able to have the choice whether to work with this landlord or not. If for whatever reason you're not comfortable with this landlord because of certain vibes they're giving out or certain things that they say, then you should actually drop the client.
The discussion being what it is online, are landlords becoming more sensitive or cautious in expressing these racial preferences?
I would say end of the day, if they have appointed an agent to help them to lease out the place, then it becomes the responsibility of the agent to actually absorb all this backlash. Yeah, because we are the front face of the landlord.
There is always the possibility that another agent will come along and like choose to go along with their preferences.
Yeah, I'm sure there are because, well, I think the market is big enough for you to choose.
Right.
It's not something that can be easily rectified. Yeah, so you probably need a lot of time to actually educate like all the stakeholders.
So it seems that the landlord's preferences for race can be due to their experiences of maintaining the condition of their property. But again, there seems to be a generalization that individuals from the same racial community have the same lifestyle practices. Even for Anne and Vishal, who are incidentally not only renters but also landlords, they share the same concern about tenants maintaining the condition of their place. However, their approach is more calibrated.
One of our main concerns would be the well-being of our children. So we would want to sublet or rent out our unit, a family or a couple who would not be a bad influence to the children and who would not be disruptive to their sleep or to their studies.
When you mention couple, like it's like all kinds of couples.
The couple is like have a Muslim background. I think that can be an issue. I know they have a lot of restrictions.
Because it could be the culture. Because I'm Chinese, so I eat pork. Let's say the tenant is a Muslim. I also don't know how to handle this.
Let's say Buddhism, you can't eat beef. It's more acceptable. Like if they find someone that is along the same belief, so they won't have any issues.
Not a racial preference per se, perhaps in the context of religion. Yes, there may be certain religions who are fundamentalist in their beliefs. Let's say a certain religion like Judaism or Islam where they prohibit the cooking of certain foods.
Yeah, actually I would prefer someone who don't cook heavily because I'm very particular about cleanliness.
On your own listings, do you indicate like only light cooking is allowed or no heavy cooking?
I did not indicate that because I will prefer to meet the tenants personally and I want to ask questions.
So for people who are in similar positions as yourselves, what would your advice be to them?
They should indicate to the landlord that they're interracial or that they are from a minority. Based on that, they should carry the conversation forward.
References, maybe from the ex-landlord, we can get the ex-landlord to talk to the new landlord, about recommendations that, climb the good profile, I think being a minorities, right, you have to do a lot of works. Yeah, it takes a lot of efforts, compared to you have to put a lot of effort. I mean, unfortunately, this is how the system,
I wanted to further unpack why some landlords have the biases they do. What are the origins of our impressions about race and how can we counter the negative ones?
People get assumptions about other races based on their upbringing, family. So one builds up a picture of the other. Of course, with early interactions, whether they are positive or not. And for many people who don't have a lot of experiences with the other race, their interactions have been very sporadic. Could be someone in the corridor, then you just see them very occasionally. You don't really have very much actual communication with them. It's probably a buying type of relationship. So you don't really get to challenge many of what people have probably said about different groups of people. You not build that kind of friendships. So then you probably will hold on to some of these prejudices.
If some of these stereotypes or assumptions are based
on personal experience, does that kind of make them more valid or justified?
Those experiences are certainly valid, but when you start using those experiences and generalizing a whole group based on those experiences, it becomes problematic. Because there might be many other people who may not display those characteristics.
Chinese people also can have their strong smelling dishes like mala or like fish head curry. So why do you think the landlords are more concerned or sensitive to one particular race's cuisine or whatever the case may be?
It's a question of familiarity. Food and culture, ethnicity are all closely connected. So I'm just not used to curry. And I feel that people who would subsequently rent my place would have an issue about curry smells. I would say that sometimes it's not necessarily an issue about people having very strong feelings about just race, it's just about the activity and the behavior. It really should then be about people looking what exactly they don't want.
Using the example of what goes on in the rental market, like how does that affect the rest of race relations in Singapore?
When you see such behavior, it makes you uncomfortable. You wonder whether those ideals that you share about society is just not being lived without aspiring or going towards that. I think that has a way of affecting the confidence people have in race relations. Especially if you look at an ad and you see that your particular race is not welcome to rent a particular home. Yeah, of course it makes you feel disturbed, you're concerned. You feel what's wrong with people of my group, for instance. That kind of exclusion can be very painful. Though it's, it may not be somebody screaming at you and saying, I don't want you to be here.
So it's been about a week, and so we're checking back in with Cash and Asad about the listings and the experiment. So out of the 10 listings that we applied to, maybe Asad can go first, like how many asked for your race?
I think after 10, 3 actually asked for race specifically.
For me, there was 4. One of them didn't reply me when I first, messaged them about my interest. But then I switched my display picture from a picture of myself to something like an animate object. And she replied me after that, and she asked me for my race.
I also got, I think, around 4 agents asking me for my race. But out of those 4, for you two, did any of them mention an explicit preference for Chinese renters?
Yes. Actually, there was 1 or 2 of them.
Same for me, I had 2 specifically. The landlord prefers a Chinese, and I asked why. She said no reason, just prefers Chinese. And the other one is they say they prefer Chinese because the landlord is elderly and can only communicate in Chinese, which I guess I understand.
Do you think that perhaps if you guys had an agent to help you with this search or to filter out such biases, would that be a viable option or something that you're interested in?
I would definitely go through an agent. One reason being is to kind of just separate myself from all that negativity out there, let my agent handle it, right?
I mean, even if they filter out and I don't know about it, but it's still happening, people still prefer to have a certain race. I would say rather than having a racial preference, they should have expectations of what you can do and what you cannot do. A lot of people have racial prejudice because of certain practices that they think these people do, but some don't. I could be Malay, but I could speak Chinese. Maybe I don't do prayers, for example.
Well, I guess this is a very simplified test, and we only reached out to a handful of listings, so it's definitely not indicative of the market as a whole. And there are probably other preferences that the landlords have. It might be to do with socioeconomic background, or it might have to do with maybe orientation. It could also be gender. So after this experiment, what are your overall feelings towards the racial bias issue in the rental market?
It is still quite sad, in terms of the opportunities for people like myself and Asad who can afford it, and this could be the only option for us, but we are turned down because of our skin color. That's just not the best.
It's a bit disheartening, but then I expected some of this. I'm glad that it's lesser, but I still think that there's work to do, and I wish that I could get some without having to mention race ever.
Obviously, there aren't any overnight solutions, but renters do have a few options when facing this problem.
Would it actually help agents if there was some kind of legal framework to address these issues?
There is certain limits that the government can do regarding like legal framework and stuff, because end of the day it's still people's investment, people's house. So it should be fair that they can choose who they want to rent to. So I think the word here should be education. How we actually educate people to be more accommodating to different races, different cultures.
If I'm a Singaporean renter and I encounter this kind of race-based discrimination, practically, like, what can I do when I face this obstacle?
Your agent has to be the one that tries to find the property for you. So they will be the first in line to filter the properties for you, in the hope that you will not actually have a chance to even be racial discriminated.
Oh, right.
Yeah. If our landlord or tenant says something, we try to filter so that it becomes very neutral.
So they should get themselves like an agent who's on their side.
Agents who is professional and understands these things, because a renter, all they want is just to find the right property, right? So end of the day, they don't want to deal with the people behind them. So as long as the agent can find a house, whatever the agent hears, it doesn't need to be communicated to the tenant.
Having an agent who understands your needs, especially if they're specific to one's cultural background, is certainly important for a smooth sailing experience in the rental market. Alternatively, if you have a more DIY approach to your property search, filters like diversity-friendly tags could reduce your chances of unpleasant interactions. These tags can also be used by the differently abled or those in the LGBTQ community.
These are all practical choices to make the search a little easier. However, there's the argument to be made that if racial harmony exists in Singapore, why is there the need for these diversity-friendly tags? How can the concerns of both tenants and landlords be addressed such that inaccurate generalizations don't dictate who can or cannot rent a place in Singapore?
I think the whole issue about discrimination and proving discrimination is a very difficult endeavor. Every individual has their preferences. So it's a fine line between having your preferences, working off your preferences, and that process really being discriminatory. So I think at best, what you can do is you can remove things which are overt, especially when people put it down as advertisements. So the agents do their best to inform landlords and make sure that they realize that it is very important that they safeguard this. Of course, I think then the other side is that probably needs to be more attention given to the kind of protections that landlords receive. There's sufficient insurance for landlords such that, you know, if you have a rogue tenant or whatever ethnic background, some things can be fixed and taken care of. And perhaps it's much easier to not have to use biased lenses to make that decision about who to rent to based on the fact that you're worried that you will be at the losing end.